Okay, guys, I believe we are live today. I am Killian, as always, the host of the Questionable Perspective here. And this video is in particular response, and we'll focus particularly on an article that appeared in Vox titled "The Raging Controversy Over Bernie Bros and the So-Called Dirtbag Left Explained." So what I'm going to do with this video is I'm going to go over the article, and I highlighted portions of the article, and I intend to read mainly the highlighted portions, but depending on how I'm feeling, I might read even more of the article. But bear with me, we're going to read through it, and then I'm going to piece by piece kind of dissect and kind of dive into what they're saying that I'm going to bring up. So give me 1 second here. I'm going to pull this article up, and then at the end of the video, I'm going to bring out some evidence that shows that potentially the exact opposite of what they are claiming is true. So let's see here. Okay, so the raging controversy over Bernie Bros and so-called dirtbag left appearing in Vox. So they start out by saying that the Bernie Bros stereotype is reductive, but there's a specific group of Bernie Sanders fans that pose a real problem for him. And so this is kind of like one of those articles where they're kind of they are providing some level of nuance to their take, which makes it seem at least a little bit more reasonable. And this is from Vox, which is a more left-leaning news site, but at the same time they're still falling into the trap of allowing a narrative to be spun where a narrative shouldn't be allowed, and where that narrative isn't this false narrative that they're still giving credence to, even in some respects, is still being used and weaponized against the people that they're talking about. Okay. So they say, they start talking about Elizabeth Warren and her drop out of the race, and it says, yet she didn't. It says, it seemed natural to many that when Senator Elizabeth Warren dropped out of the presidential race, she would endorse her longtime ally for Bernie Sanders for president. Yet she didn't, and the one reason, judged by her Thursday exit interview with Rachel Maddow, is anger at the way Bernie's online supporters have behaved. To online harassment of generally female Warren supporters. Okay, so let's start here, I guess, because I'm a little sick and tired of even talking about Elizabeth Warren just because she's just so disingenuous. And so what we're getting at here is, if you watch the way Elizabeth Warren ran her campaign, it was basically posing herself by standing beside Sanders. And if you saw in any of the early debates, she was always there's always photos of her and Sanders, or them fighting off the moderates or whatever, or them being within the same lane. And essentially, Elizabeth Warren tried to pose herself as a progressive in the same vein as Bernie Sanders, but a little bit more cuddly and more appealing to the establishment. So eventually, though, once she started kind of faltering on Medicare for All and people really started taking a deeper dive into it, that lane kind of closed a little bit, and Bernie Sanders regained his support. Well, because Warren had been coming in a very high second place in the summer polls, and then she fell off tremendously, just rapidly. Once people kind of figured out more about who she really was and what she was really doing. But the main part of what I'm trying to get at here is essentially, ideologically, Elizabeth Warren tried to kind of coast off of the wind that Bernie Sanders was making. And so she tried to stand next to him and say ideologically that these two are friends and that these two have all these plans, and it's me and Bernie this, me and Bernie that, I'm this and I'm that. And then eventually what happens is, coming into Iowa, I think happens on February 3rd, and leading into that week, right before the debate happens, Elizabeth Warren leaks. So this is what I'm trying to get at, is it talks about these snake emojis, but it doesn't give any context to why there were snake emojis, but we'll even get to whether or not snake emojis is even a relevant thing. But let's get to the background of what the snake emoji, where this kind of like originated from. So like a week before the first caucus, where Bernie Sanders is now starting to lead the polls, he's beating everybody. Elizabeth Warren is still continuing to her staffers, and then it comes out that she is implicating Bernie Sanders into being a sexist, and saying that a woman couldn't win the presidency, which, if you understand the backstory of that story, is ludicrous, because Bernie Sanders had begged Elizabeth Warren to run in 2015 because he did not want to run. And then so based on like just who Bernie Sanders is, based on Bernie Sanders' actions, it would make no sense for him to say that a woman could not run. And yet then coming into it, she starts to run with this narrative. She never denies it, and then eventually, even on the stage, the CNN, trying to cause drama, then levels a question at Bernie about it, and then Elizabeth Warren runs with this narrative, implicates Bernie Sanders as being sexist, all within a week of the first caucus in Iowa. So let me ask you, if somebody who had been riding on your coattails, pretending to be your friend, somebody who you had never attacked before, did this to you, would you consider them to be a quote-unquote snake? What does a snake mean? Somebody who's going to stab you in the back. Does that sound like somebody who is playing malicious games with you? And I think the objective answer to that, when you look at the evidence and the events that occurred, was that yes, she was acting in this way. So basically, she then gets angry at Sanders supporters for flooding her mentions with snake emojis after doing this. And the thing is, this might be a little bit more of a fair criticism of Sanders supporters if this was a private citizen, or this was as if though it wasn't on a public platform. But this occurred on a public platform with an individual who is running for president, who is in the light of the public, has the blue check, which signifies being a public figure, getting responded to for how she was acting in a race. And so just the very fact of the matter of why the snake emojis happened is fair enough. But now let's get to the question. She says, when Maddow asks, is a particular problem with Sanders supporters, Warren replied bluntly, it isn't. It's just a factual question. She's saying that because Bernie was basically going against the entire establishment, and his supporters were too in turn. So when they replied to this, and Bernie has the biggest group of support, and so it comes to this question of, were these snake emojis justifiable? This is just a side note. Were these snake emojis justifiable in breaking your ideological bearings, the way that you postured yourself in the campaign? Why, if is it enough to say that because somebody tweeted emojis at me that were negative in nature, that you are then willing to you are then willing to get rid of all of your principles and like screw universal healthcare, screw education, screw X, Y, and Z, and screw the way that you had been running over snake emojis? I find that to be I consider that to be complete nonsense and a cynical view of Warren. And my view of Warren is that she did this specifically to injure Sanders, and these questions posed to Elizabeth Warren, or these questions by Maddow and replied to by Elizabeth Warren, post her dropping out, which was also late and hurt Bernie Sanders intentionally, in my view, is just it warrants. The snake emojis are even more relevant after what had occurred. So that's just the backstory on the snake emojis. But snake emojis should not derail somebody from believing in the policies that are going to materially impact Bernie Sanders, or not Bernie Sanders, but the American population and as a whole, and what she claimed to be running on. So then we're gonna go on. a little bit. I'm going to try to get through this fast. It's a pretty large article. I'm going to try to get through it fast. Warren's frustrations cut the heart of the debate, blah, 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 blah. Media's focus on Bernie bros. A term coined in 2016 to describe privileged white male Sanders supporters that don't accurately describe his 2020 base has obscured the real nature of the problem, a particular subculture among Sanders fans. So then that they at least give credence to the idea that this does not accurately describe his 2016 base and more so his 2020 base. Bernie Sanders supporters are majority female, number one, and it discredits just the term Bernie bro is a derogatory statement that is indicative of quote unquote dirtbag politics that you are then accusing Bernie Sanders supporters of engaging in. So the very term Bernie bros is derogatory in nature. So why do you expect somebody who is getting derided, minimalize and suppressing their voices to act in a favorable manner towards you? Because what the Bernie bro narrative did is it silences voices of people of color. It silences voices of people of women. It suppresses suppresses voices of people of the LGBTQ community, and so on and so forth. So the term in itself, in being inaccurate, also is minimizing supporters of Sanders and minimizing their voices, which, according to the Democratic Party, this type of minimization and this type of suppression is right-wing politics, and it is something that the right does to the left, and yet they're doing the very same thing. And then they have the audacity to then call Bernie Sanders supporters the dirtbag left. So we're gonna keep going here on this. So they say that the group was coalesced around a loose group of left-wing media outlets that call themselves the dirtbag left, most notably the podcast Chapo's Trap House. The dirtbag left promotes vulgar online attacks as means of promoting left-wing politics. Okay, so I don't watch Chapo's Trap House, and whether or not they call themselves the dirtbag left, that's probably in satire. But what it gets down to is I watch a lot of left-wing commentators, and left-wing commentators, the biggest ones being Secular Talk with Kyle Kalinske, Jimmy Dore, Rational National, Humanist Report, so on and so forth, TYT, a bunch of other outlets, and these people are not part of, and so you are taking out one YouTube channel with, I believe, less than 200,000 subscribers on YouTube, and using that as your straw man of why Bernie Sanders supporters are more crude, or at least a subsection of them, according to you, since you're trying to be a little bit more nuanced in this article. You're saying this one subsection of Bernie Sanders supporters is galvanizing around vulgar online attacks as means of promoting left-wing politics, which is just asinine, and it's not true. So let's continue. They say many Democrats see the behavior of Sanders' dirtbag left fans as a reflection of the campaign and link their rhetoric to Sanders supporters' harassment of Nevada culinary staff. There is no evidence that Chapo fans are the ones responsible for the union attacks. Fairly or unfairly, many Democrats believe, as Warren does, that Sanders should have done more to rein his fans in. So what does that mean? So you've once again, because you're trying to take a little bit more nuanced of a position, concede that Sanders supporters were not. There's no evidence that Chapo fans were responsible for the union attacks. And speaking of those union attacks, that narrative was bolstered by the mainstream media and was done by potentially a handful of people that is not indicative of the Bernie Sanders movement at all. And this is the thing, they do these things just to hurt Bernie Sanders and to hurt his movement. They use these strawmen, they use these outliers to then hurt the movement and then cast a broad brush, accusing the movement of condoning this stuff, when Bernie Sanders, at the detriment of all of his supporters, has been too kind to the media, too kind to his opponents, and has not attacked them in the way that we would have liked. And when we attack, I mean, we mean point out policy differences and things of that nature, things of record and things of leadership. And yet they want to claim that Sanders supporters are are evil because of the Nevada Culinary Union staff situation, which was once more fabricated by the media as a narrative to hurt Bernie Sanders before the Nevada caucuses. So we move on to let's see. The perception that Sanders partisans are a font of online nastiness and harassment is a real problem for Bernie. They make it harder for positioning himself as a potentially unifying leader at a time when campaign needs to stop treating Democrats like the enemy. Well, here's the situation, guys. This could basically be the whole damn problem with this whole article. The perception that Sanders partisans are a font of online nastiness and harassment is the real problem for Bernie. They make it harder for positioning himself as a potential unifying leader at a time when the campaign needs to stop treating Democrats like the enemy. But this is the thing. The narrative being spun, as you've already conceded, that Bernie Bros is reductive in nature, is false. So how is it Bernie? Yeah, it's a real problem for Bernie Sanders. Yes, I agree with that. The perception of Bernie Bros hurt Bernie Sanders with mainstream people that were not paying attention to politics as much and were watching mainstream news outlets that were throwing this inaccurate claim around. And do you know why it was done? It was done exactly for the to cause that problem, because Bernie Sanders' record was too squeaky clean. His views were too squeaky clean. So they had to create a narrative that was, once again, as I've told you, minimizes the voices of people like myself, women of women in the movement, women of color, LGBTQ people, and so on and so forth. And so it's not really, yes, it's a problem for Bernie, and the problem for Bernie is that he never stood up to those attacks. He bought into the attacks. He never fully put his foot down and said, no, these attacks are false. These attacks are unrepresented by the data, which I will show you in a little bit. And as you've already conceded, that these are unfair criticisms. So how is it Bernie Sanders' problem? I mean, it is his problem, but how is it that you want Bernie Sanders to fix a problem that was crafted by the media nefariously to attack his campaign? I really like an answer to that. How is Bernie Sanders, besides being more aggressive against the media, supposed to address this problem that was non-existent and is an illusion in nature? So anyway, the article goes on to say the Bernie bro is a stereotype, but the dirtbag left is real. So I think what they're trying to get at is that I don't know if the dirtbag left is real. I don't know if they're trying to say that now that they're not Bernie bros, that women and people of color can now also be thrown into the category of dirtbag left, but we'll continue on. Let's see here. So the problem with the demographic argument, as Meyer himself noted, is that Sanders fans were not disproportionately male. They certainly don't fit the rich white man stereotype conjured by the Bernie bro phrase. The stereotype was wrong in 2016 and has become even more wrong in 2020. Well, thanks. In the first few primaries of the cycle, Sanders cleaned up with Latino voters, Asian voters, and he won outright with young women and young African Americans, relating the fact that age rather than race or gender is the biggest detriment of Sanders versus Biden support. It's simply false to call Bernie Sanders a candidate of privileged white men. Some of the Sanders fans have even started calling themselves Bernie bros as a form of ironic reappropriation, which I don't agree with that tactic, because then it just legitimizes that myth and it makes it harder for us to fight against it. So do not call yourself Bernie bros. We are not Bernie bros. We will not use that pejorative and try to turn it back around in our favor, because I don't think it's doing us a service. As a side note, but so then talks about the searches of Bernie bros and such, and then we go to, again, they talk about the culinary union getting doxxed by, you know how many people it takes to dox somebody? One person. It only takes one person to dox somebody. There's no evidence that this was encouraged by Bernie supporters, or was the majority of them, or is even more than one person or a handful of them. So They go on to talk again about the Warren thing, which I've explained, and of why that those snake emojis were justified. So, and didn't actually say anything of real detriment. Let's see. So then they start to talk about Chapo's travels again. They say the insults described in the second paragraph, however, are short of a thing the dirtbag left valorizes. Its leading voices believe very deeply that bitter mocking, including, yes, insults targeting your opponent's physical appearances, are vital for holding the powerful accountable. It's not all that Chapo's Trap for example, does. A lot of the show features conventional punditry and political analysis from a socialist point of view, levied by a heavy dose of irony, but what makes their political style distinctive is an embrace of harsh, cruel... Okay, so basically, they're taking the quote, what I would consider to be the late night show or the Comedy Central version of the left. They're using one show to then prove that there is a dirtbag left. And yes, there is people that are following this, but this isn't even how Bernie Sanders supporters interact online. So I'd like to continue on. This one was uncalled for here. I do agree with that. Let's see. Okay, so we're going to go into the next section of this article. It says, Bernie's dirtbag left problem. I'm going to read most of it, and I'm going to comment on it as I see fit. It's true that all candidates have nasty supporters. Sanders doesn't have a monopoly on fans who've treated their opponents cruelly online, but there is no equivalent to Chapo and other dirtbag left outlets on the side of the Democratic Party interval divide. A closely media outlet has elevated online abuse to its opponents and political value. Okay, so honestly, this right here, I should just cut this out and clip this right here. This is the... One second, let me highlight this quick, just because I think it's so pivotal. This statement. So what happens is they then become they produce a faux nuanced position saying that Bernie bros are not a problem, but it's dirtbag left. So as to not be as reductive as they were before, which still is inaccurate, they then go on to say it's true that all candidates have nasty supporters. Sanders doesn't have a monopoly on fans who have treated their opponents cruelly online. But there's no equivalent to Chapo and other dirtbag left outlets on the other side of the Democratic Party interval divide. That's false. That's unequivocally false. And I'm going to show you examples of this. I'd tell you to remind me, but I'd remind myself to come back to this. But I'm going to continue going on. But remember this statement. Remember this statement closely. They say roughly 22% of Americans use Twitter. So exactly. So not even a huge portion of Sanders supporters could even be part of this, but let's keep going. So it says, fundamentally, if Sanders and the movement want to succeed in remaking the Democratic Party in their image, they can't just drive out every person in a position of power to go from insurgents to party leaders. They need to figure out a way to persuade the rest of the party to join its cause. Right now, it seems like pro-Sanders online brigades are making that harder. Do you know what's actually making it harder? Is that every time that Sanders, because you're in a public platform, the Twitter is a public platform, so you're obviously going to get a lot of replies. Bernie Sanders has the most online followers, so you're obviously going to get the most replies from Bernie Sanders supporters, logically. So then it makes it seem as if though they're flooding it, but there's just more people who are seeing it. And if you don't want your things being seen, number one, don't be a public figure. Number two, don't have your Twitter account public on Twitter. You're obviously trying to disseminate your opinion into the ether and trying to get that spread around. So when you see people replying to you, this is not a brigade of people attacking you. This is people responding to you. And when they're responding to you about policy ideas, that's the thing. Facts are not attacks. I've said it before. I've heard other people say it before. It's just the truth. If I point out policy difference between us and point out that this policy does X, Y, and Z, then yes, that is a valid response to what you're doing. And just because you may not like the fact that we're pointing out that Joe Biden was a segregationist, you might not like the fact that we're pointing out that Elizabeth Warren lied about being Native American, minimalizing Native American experiences. You may not like the fact that we are saying that people just working for a company that fixed bread prices is wrong. Those things, you may not like those things, but all those things are true nonetheless. So you cannot pretend as if though what we are doing is wrong. And yes, there is people in the Chapo Trap House. Like I said, I don't watch them, but I am a part of what would be considered the Bernie Sanders sphere of Twitter, and I see a lot of things on Twitter, and I watch a lot of commentators that are a lot bigger than this group is, and there's a lot more influential to Bernie Sanders supporters, and the majority of us are pointing out, our criticisms are pointing out policy differences and lies of other politicians and lack of leadership. So I want to continue on, and it says, the response in the mind of Sanders critics is in some ways the problem. The dirtbag left sees the race in such starkly moral terms. Either you support Bernie or you want poor people to get sick and die. They're willing to countenance abusive tactics in order to get people on board. They don't understand how anyone would disagree with Sanders in good faith, or how treating someone viciously might counterproductive to the cause they profess to care about. Yes, I know it's crazy that when you go onto an online platform, like I've already stated, and you receive replies that point out that yes, your program, Bernie Sanders' program, would keep everybody insured, and medical journals in Yale. I'm sorry. I guess it was just the Yale publication. So it was the Yale publication, the part of the dirtbag left, the publication that said that Medicare for all would, at a low estimate, save 68,000 people from dying. Is it erroneous to say that college for all would lower the wealth gap between black and white Americans, and canceling that debt would lower the gap from 12 to 1, and your agreement with keeping that debt in existence is continuing racial inequality? Are these things wrong? Is it wrong to point these things out? It may not be convenient to the Democratic Party. This is the whole thing, is the Democrats are concerned with civility. The Democrats want to be seen as the shining beacon of what is morally upstanding, because they can stand next to the Republican Party, who everybody has already agreed is a detriment to society, and say, look, we're better than them. Well, wow, it's hard to be better than somebody than a group of people that is so vile. How have you set yourself a bar so low? So then it comes down to, so if you're going to see it in starkly moral terms, I'm sorry, mainstream Democrats see it in starkly moral terms when they're criticizing the right, when they're criticizing super conservative Democrats, when they're doing these things. Those things being seen in morally stark terms is not to be condescended, but when we see things in morally stark terms, it's to be condescended. And you know why that is? Because the left has not proven themselves to have the power to not go out and to tell these Democrats that we will not vote for anybody that is for things like drone bombing countries. I'm sorry, is it inconvenient to you to tell you that Barack Obama drone bombed more people than any president in history? Is that an inconvenient fact to you? I'm sorry. Am I being a part of the dirtbag left because I'm pointing out that you are enabling a system which is causing not only global harm, but is causing harm to the citizens and the working class of America? Is that what we're doing? We're gonna condescend people as being starkly immoral when we're talking about things that are a moral reality. I know that the world is big and that we've been able to numb ourselves to the pains and to the atrocities that the American empire has done to people abroad and to people in its empire, the working class, black and brown people, women, LGBT, you know what I'm saying, as Joe Biden would say. You know the phrase, LGBTQ people. And so is it really weird to see these things? That's the whole problem. Is, like I've been saying, is they don't want to be seen as morally reprehensible, because that would go against their entire glass house, their entire framework and identity of how they see themselves as the world. So seeing these policy differences strikes a chord in them. It attacks them at their very fiber of their identity. They can no longer hide behind this guise of being the morally superior people and trying to feel better about themselves than Republicans. And that's part of the entire problem. So I'm going to keep going on and reading. I don't know. Okay. So blah 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 blah. Let's see what the conclusion here says. The conclusion always has some bullshit in these type of articles. The backlash from the mainstream Democrats and some pro-Sanders left raises two questions. First, the dirtbag left have an interest in reforming, or are they even capable of it? And second, what are the concrete steps that Sanders' campaign can take to repair its image? It's hardly the cosmic issue at stake in the 2020 election, but it's crucially important one politically, one that could influence just about how much power Sanders and his allies wield in the Democratic Party in coming years. Once more, I'll say it again. This problem is not at the feet of Bernie Sanders. Well, it is, because he still has to rebuff it, and he still has to figure out how to do it. But it's this idea that the Bernie Sanders campaign is allowed us to do these things. So I'm gonna skip over here to a Salon article, another left-leaning article that did a better job. That comes from they do an analysis. I'm gonna skip to this real quick. I'm gonna have to read the whole article, but essentially Jeff Winchell, I think, a computer scientist here, looking at an analysis that was done of Twitter mentions and Twitter of how they believe Bernie Sanders supporters have been negative in nature. And it says, candidates' Twitter followers don't differ much in the chance someone tweets are negative. New update adds Microsoft's deep learning-based sentiment analysis algorithm. It predicts the chance of positive text blobs. Algorithm rates tweets from -1 to 1 pause. Okay, so Bernie Sanders has the highest amount of followers, and it says the average chance of something being positive from supporters of Bernie is 59%. From Yang, 59%. Warren, 59%. Buttigieg, 60%. Tulsi, 58%. Biden, 60%. Trump, 60%. Klobuchar, 60%. Steyer, 59%. Bloomberg, 60%. Low chance, or text blob, -%. Bernie, 4%. Yang, 4%. Warren, 4%. Buttigieg, 4%. Tulsi, 4%. Biden, 4%. Trump, 4%. Klobuchar, 4%. Steyer, 4%. Bloomberg, 3%. Text blob, very negative. Bernie, 2%. Yang, 2%. Warren, 2%. Buttigieg, 2%. Tulsi, 2%. And it's actually they're all 2%. So the whole idea, an analysis done by a Microsoft deep learning algorithm and then posted in Salon, is saying that has come to the conclusion that this whole entire thing is a myth. So they've been using a straw man of an argument. They've been using a straw man of an argument to say that these things are that something is going on. So they're saying that, okay, Bernie Bros is too reductive. There's obviously women and people of color, LGBTQ people, that are a part of this movement, so it's reductive to do that. But guess what? Bernie Sanders supporters being more negative is still a real thing. Giving credence to a false narrative proven by a statistical analysis of Twitter responses, which is where the Bernie Bro thing originates from. So then, but what I would like to come back to is, as you can see, that all those things, all of them were about equal. If my page wants to cooperate, it says it's true that all candidates have nasty supporters. Sanders doesn't have any monopoly on fans who've treated their opponents cruelly online, but there's no equivalent to Chapo and the other dirtbag left outlets on the other side of the Democratic Party's internal divide. Oh, is that so? Is that what we're doing? We're saying that there's no equivalent to this. How about after Bernie Sanders had momentum and we had Chuck Todd? Let me pull this clip up quick. Let's listen to Chuck Todd quick, and then we'll come back and we'll determine if that statement is true, from MSNBC. Okay, let's hear it. So Chuck Todd goes on air and quotes something that calls Bernie Sanders part of the Brown Shirt Brigade, which was part of Hitler's army. So he is comparing the Jewish candidate in the race, his supporters, to being likened to
people that are in that were part of the Holocaust, one of the most egregious acts ever in the history. So, but there's more. There's more. Chris Matthews, who had to resign, was said on air that I think it was after Bernie Sanders won the Nevada caucus. He said that this was akin to the fall. It felt like the fall of France when Germany invaded France. They likened the Bernie Sanders movement to the fall of France in the Holocaust. That is repugnant. That is nasty, and that disproves your point that there's no equivalent to the dirtbag left. There is people on mainstream media every day attacking Bernie Sanders supporters, and it's just like every time in real life, it's the person who counterpunches that gets blamed for the incident, not the people who started it. And it's in these instances, these people who are getting paid millions of dollars to go on air and propagandize the American population are going and saying things, analogizing Bernie Sanders supporters to part of the Holocaust movement, even though he's going to be the first potentially would be the first Jewish president. It's disgusting. And articles like these that have these nuance, that want to make themselves, they want to feign as if though they're even more nuanced than part of the left or part of the Democratic establishment, is disgusting. That you have the audacity to type something like there's no other outlets that have done things akin to Chapo's Trap House. So, which is a straw man of the left in itself. Then we come over to CNN saying, let's listen to this clip from CNN.
Can either coronavirus or Bernie Sanders be stopped? I'm Michael Smerconish in Philadelphia.
He says, can either coronavirus or Michael Smerconish goes on CNN on February 29, 2020 and says, can either coronavirus or Bernie Sanders be stopped? He is likening the Bernie Sanders movement to a virus that is decimating the world right now. It's causing a global pandemic, and at the time it wasn't a global pandemic yet, but it was an epidemic in China, Italy, everywhere. And they have the audacity to go on CNN and liken. And like you have to understand, like, did you go to college or not? You have to understand that the way narratives are set, the way people internalize, and the way people process information, you're likening something as negative as the coronavirus to Bernie Sanders. That is not done by accident. Everybody knows how messaging works. So these type of attempts from the media, it's disgusting, and it once more proves the point that it's not just Bernie Sanders supporters who are doing this. So then let's go to a political article. A Bernie Slayer fails to merge at the Tuesday's debate. It's not as egregious, but still not what you would like to be seeing from mainstream outlets. And what does that say, though? It says that everybody was against Bernie. So why would Bernie Sanders supporters feel so defensive when they feel like as if though they're backed against a wall when every other candidate is trying to attack Bernie Sanders, and they had to all drop out and endorse a senile septuagenarian to stop Bernie Sanders? So yes, there's a rightful indignation. There's a rightful anger within the Bernie Sanders left. And from here, this is just recently. This was today, 3/23/2020. It says, I'm going to state the obvious. This is from Jody Jacobson, from part of the more regular part of the left that Bernie Sanders obviously isn't a part of. He says, I'm going to state the obvious, come that way. For the past several weeks, E. Warren has been producing and lobbying others on legislation for multiple levels of COVID-19 response. Bernie's been talking, but could not be bothered to show up to work and bill or vote on it. That's just That's just illogical, because that vote was not going to pass no matter what, because it needed 60 votes, so it didn't matter. But he says, what are you fighting for at this point? Says Brianna Gray, the communications director for Bernie Sanders. Then Cliff Schechter, who is a Bloomberg reporter, a Daily Beast contributor, and a bunch of other things within this establishment, are saying, what are you fighting for? I know what it is. I know what Jody is. She didn't selfishly and stupidly broadcast on her network to vote for Jill Stein. You own a whole lot of this. By the way, Jody does more good in a year than you could in the entirety of whatever your entire troll life cycle is. Then he said, I'm embarrassed for you and everybody who believes that Trump won because New Yorker with 300 followers said she voted for Jill Stein so that third parties could get federal matching funds. And this tweet actually coming from this Cliff Schechter guy. This guy should be fired. It's unavailable because it got deleted because you know what it said? It called Brianna Joy Gray a black woman. It called her a crackhead and then went on to attack her more. And that's why this guy said whipped out the racism right quick. So you have these type of people, and then so it continues on. It's a synonym for stupid and nothing to do with what you're implying, he says. But to be extra clear, that was not what I meant. I apologize to Bree for using a word that could be misconstrued. That's on me. So let's instead go with dunderheaded, stupid, ignorant, vacacious, dull, you choose. So he's attacking her with personal insults. With this article claimed that Chapo's Trap House was advocating for. Well, this is mainstream outlets advocating for this. This is somebody attacking a surrogate of Bernie Sanders, a person in Bernie Sanders' campaign, a woman of color, and saying these type of ludicrous statements about her. And yet I commend Brianna Joy Gray for having the power to not reply negatively to what was being stated to her, because it was ugly, it was offensive, and it was racist, and this is part of what's supposed to be establishment left. So these examples just prove that this is just exactly not true. Now it becomes a question, straw man for straw man. You have your people in the Democratic establishment saying these things, which I would say is even higher amount of people that are saying these things versus people. Obviously the data says it's equal, so I'll go with that, but these people are in positions of power, so it might be more potent in a sense. But so Brianna Joy Gray is being attacked, and the left and people in Bernie Sanders' campaign are continually receiving attacks like this during the campaign. Number one, the media never reported on this. The media sets the narrative, sets what's being covered. The mainstream media never reported on this, thus minimizing these instances. Then the media the media then runs a narrative out there that has been statistically proven to be false. Yet the problem is, was it ever thought of that when people were angry at people in the Democratic establishment, that they had rightful indignation, that they had rightful pains and sorrows, and that people had been attacking them the whole time, that maybe they were just responding, that maybe these people are part of the working class and they don't live in the coastal cities going to rich dinners but grew up in areas where, you know what, when you were a kid, you went out and you were a little bit more rough and tumble. When the working class has a right to be angry, that the working class will not be muzzled by civility politics, that the working class will not be told that the way they speak is less than. That's another form of classism that never gets addressed, is that the way that the Democrats have become the party of corporate elites and coastal elites, because there is no room in the Democratic Party, or at least they're trying to make it as if there's no room in the Democratic Party for people of the working class who came from backgrounds where you're a little bit more rough and tumble, where when somebody punches you in the nose, you get up and punch them back. But no, not here. In the Democratic establishment, in the good old boys world, they want you to be good boys and girls and just take it on the chin and say nothing and take your scraps. That's what they've been screaming to the left for ages, and I find it to be reprehensible. So I hope you guys enjoyed. This is a super long video. It's coming in on 45 minutes. I did not anticipate it to be that long, but it was a long article. I had to go through a lot of things. There were a lot of topics to be discussed, and it's just, honestly, this whole Bernie bro narrative needs to be squashed, and everybody who ran with this narrative needs to offer a formal apology for propagandizing the American population. But thank you guys for joining me. I'm going to have more videos coming up related to the pandemic at hand, the COVID-19 situation, the continuation of the election, and a lot more coming up. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching. Peace out, guys.